Genevieve was 34, living on the fringes of a small New England town where pine forests rolled into lazy pastures and the sky always felt just a little too big. She had married Mark when she was 24, back when his quiet strength felt like stability, and not the smothering silence it had become over the last decade. Mark was a contractor, constantly on the road for site management and logistics work. His company had him hopping state lines more often than not, and their conversations had dwindled to short texts and transactional phone calls, dinners in the fridge. Flight delayed again. Tell Mom happy birthday. Genevieve had started volunteering at Maple Hollow Stables last spring. At first, it was just something to fill the long hours, a way to be around people without having to talk too much. But eventually, it became a refuge. Especially because of one creature, a striking black Frisian gelding named Argento. He had a scar over one eye and a temper to match. Most of the volunteers avoided him. But Genevieve didn't. She found peace in brushing his coarse mane and feeding him from her hand. He never looked at her the way Mark did, with distant politeness or quiet dismissal. No, Argento looked right through her. And oddly, that made her feel more seen than she had in years. One late October afternoon, Genevieve stayed longer than usual. The last of the other volunteers had already left. The trees had turned copper and gold, and the air carried a bite that warned of winter's approach. She leaned against the stall, watching Argento chew calmly, occasionally flicking his ears as if he could sense her thoughts. She whispered, "You ever just want to run away from everything?" He huffed. She smiled. "Yeah, me too." From behind her, a voice called out. "You know he was an eventing horse? Competed all over Europe. Used to be wild. Uncontrollable." Genevieve turned to see Delaney, the stables manager. Early 40s, sharp-eyed, and always walking like she had too many things to do in too little time. She was wiping her hands on a rag, nodding toward Argento. "He doesn't let just anyone close." "You've got a strange bond with him," Delaney said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Just be careful. Animals know when we're not steady." Genevieve nodded but didn't say anything. Delaney's words stuck in her mind long after she drove home. That night, as she climbed into bed alone, the silence was deafening. Mark had texted her hours earlier, overtime again. "Don't wait up." He didn't ask how she was. He never did anymore. Genevieve lay in the dark, replaying every moment she'd spent with Argento, the way he tilted his head when she spoke softly, how he nudged her palm for more grain, the warm breath that hit her cheek whenever she leaned too close. Something about the horse unsettled her, but in a way that felt awakening, and in that quiet, something long dormant inside her stirred. Not lust, not fantasy, but a craving, to be felt, to be connected, to be something more than invisible. The next few days, Genevieve found herself waking up with a strange sense of urgency, almost like anticipation. Her thoughts often drifted to the stables before her feet even touched the ground. She tried to dismiss it. Surely it was just the freedom, the fresh air, the break from her sterile, half-empty house, but deep down, she knew better. It wasn't just the barn. It was Argento. By Thursday, a rare warmth returned to the autumn air, and she arrived at Maple Hollow just past noon. Most of the volunteers came in the mornings or evenings, but Genevieve had rearranged her schedule to come during the quiet middle hours, when it would just be her, Argento, and the sound of leaves stirring in the wind. He whinnied softly as she approached. She smiled, stepping closer. "Hey there, boy. Miss me?" He nudged her shoulder firmly, nearly pushing her back a step. She laughed and reached to stroke his neck, feeling the muscles flex beneath his glossy coat. There was a wildness to him that never fully settled. Even in his calmest moments, she could sense it, something caged, restless, mirroring her own unease. She led him from the stall and walked him to the far paddock. He moved beside her with confidence, his heavy hooves thudding against the packed earth. Out here, with no one around, Genevieve felt something loosen inside her, like she could breathe again. She whispered to him as they walked about her empty mornings, about Mark's growing distance, about how small she had begun to feel inside her own life. Argento didn't judge. He simply walked beside her, warm and solid. When they reached the paddock, she leaned against the fence as he trotted ahead. She watched him move, graceful, powerful, untamed. The way his mane flew, the stomp of his hooves, the glint in his eyes. Her breath caught, and she hated herself for it, the way her chest tightened, how she couldn't look away, how her thoughts tangled with feelings that had no name. A sound broke her trance. She turned. Delaney stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "You've been coming here a lot lately," she said. Genevieve nodded, trying to sound casual. "It's peaceful." Delaney tilted her head. "Peaceful can turn into something else if you're not careful." Genevieve stiffened. "What do you mean?" Delaney didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the fence, watching Argento in silence. "He's intuitive. Mirrors people. If you're lost, he'll show you how lost you really are." Genevieve felt her cheeks flush. I'm fine. Delaney looked at her then, hard and direct. Are you? It stung more than she expected. Not because it wasn't true, but because she'd worked so hard to convince herself otherwise. That night, Genevieve stayed at the stables after everyone had gone. She fed Argento his grain, brushed him until his coat shone like ink under the barn lights. The smell of hay and horse sweat lingered in the air. Outside, dusk folded over the hills in thick blue shadows. She should have left, but instead, she found herself sitting beside him in the stall, her back against the wooden slats, heart thudding in a rhythm she couldn't explain. Argento stood over her, nuzzling her shoulder. His breath was hot against her neck. Her hand drifted to his muzzle, fingers trembling slightly. I don't know what's wrong with me, she whispered. I just don't want to feel alone anymore. She closed her eyes, felt his weight beside her, his warmth, and for a moment, she let go, of logic, of guilt, of the line she'd never thought she'd cross. That was when she heard it, the sharp intake of breath. Genevieve's eyes flew open. Delaney stood in the doorway, her face unreadable but her silence deafening. Genevieve scrambled to her feet, brushing hay from her jeans, heart slamming. Delaney didn't say anything, just looked at her for a long, hard second before turning and walking away. Genevieve stood there frozen, shame and panic crashing over her like cold water. Whatever line she thought she was towing, it had already blurred. And now someone else knew. The barn felt colder the next morning, and not because of the weather. Genevieve hesitated at the entrance, her hand hovering just above the latch, before finally pushing it open. The scent of fresh hay, damp wood, and horse sweat hit her, but something in the air had shifted. She glanced around. Delaney was brushing down one of the mares in the corner stall, but she didn't look up when Genevieve entered. Not a word. Not even a nod. Genevieve's stomach twisted. She tried to distract herself, grabbing a pitchfork, cleaning stalls, filling water buckets, but she kept stealing glances toward Argento's stall. He stood calm, as if the night before had never happened, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. After an hour of silence, Delaney finally spoke. Her voice was low but edged with steel. Lucas is coming this afternoon. Genevieve froze. What? Your husband, Delaney said without turning around. You told me he was back in town. Said you were thinking of bringing him by. I figured I'd give you a nudge. Genevieve hadn't told her anything of the sort. She opened her mouth to say so but thought better of it. Delaney was giving her a chance, not kindly, not gently, but clearly. And maybe that was what she needed. Genevieve left early that day. She didn't say goodbye back home. She paced the kitchen like a caged animal. She tried to imagine what she would say to Lucas, what she could say that would make sense of the mess inside her. But nothing came. So, she did the only thing that made her feel steady. She showered, changed clothes, and headed back to the barn. She arrived just after 4 p.m. Lucas's car was already there. He stood outside Argento's paddock, leaning against the fence like he belonged there, though he never came to the stables with her. He turned as she approached, giving her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hey, he said. Hey, she replied, trying to keep her voice level. Lucas looked out at Argento, who was trotting lazily across the paddock. He's bigger than I thought. Genevieve nodded. They stood in silence for a few minutes. Then, Lucas said, Delaney told me you've been spending a lot of time here. Genevieve swallowed. I have. Why didn't you tell me? I tried, she said. But you were always gone. Or distracted. Or tired. Lucas nodded slowly, as if the words stung but didn't surprise him. I didn't know how far it had gotten, he said after a moment. Between us. Genevieve turned to him. I didn't either. Not until recently. He met her gaze. Is there someone else? She hesitated, and then, with her heart pounding, she said the one thing she never thought she would have to say. No. Not someone. Something. Lucas frowned. I've been lonely, she continued. And I found comfort here. With Argento. It sounds crazy. I know it does. But he made me feel seen. Alive. Something I haven't felt in years. Lucas stared at her, face unreadable. And before you jump to conclusions, she added quickly, nothing happened. Not like that. But it almost did. And I don't know what that means. Lucas's silence stretched long. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Do you still love me? Genevieve's breath caught. She didn't have an answer. Not one she could trust. I don't know, she whispered. Lucas nodded once, his jaw tight. Okay. He turned and walked toward the car. Genevieve didn't stop him. She stood by the paddock, watching Argento pace behind the fence, powerful and silent. The wind tugged at her hair, and the late afternoon sun burned gold against the barn roof. Everything she had been holding back, the shame, the hunger, the sadness, threatened to spill again. But for the first time, she didn't fight it. She let the ache rise, she let it breathe, and slowly, she began to understand. This wasn't about Argento. Or even Lucas. It was about something inside her that had been starving for years. Something she needed to name, confront, and heal, alone. Genevieve didn't return to the stables for 3 days. She needed distance, not from Argento, not from Delaney, and not even from Lucas, but from the version of herself she'd been sliding into. The part of her that had mistaken a creature's unspoken loyalty for the kind of love she hadn't been receiving at home. On the 4th day, she walked to the nearby lake just before dusk. The water was low and still, surrounded by weeping willows casting long, green shadows. For the first time in weeks, she let herself sit still without distraction. No brushing horses. No shoveling hay. No explaining herself, just stillness. A week ago, she would have run from this quiet. But now, it felt like a strange kind of grace. Like permission to stop searching for something to fill the empty space. She thought of Lucas. Of the way he looked at her when she said she didn't know if she loved him anymore. It wasn't rage in his eyes. It was sadness. And maybe that was harder to face. By the time she returned to the stables, the air had turned colder. Delaney was in the loft stacking hay bales. Genevieve walked past her without a word and went straight to Argento's stall. The moment she opened the gate, the horse turned and stepped toward her, slow, deliberate. His breath puffed warm in the chilly air as he nuzzled her palm. She smiled and ran her hand down his cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not for loving you. But for making you carry what you weren't meant to." She stood there with him for a long time, not as a woman desperately escaping her life, but as someone who had finally chosen to face it. Delaney appeared behind her a few minutes later, arms folded. "I didn't tell him, you know," she said softly. Genevieve turned. "What? Lucas? I didn't call him. He really did just show up." Genevieve nodded, unsure how to respond. Delaney leaned against the stall door. "You're not the first person to fall in love with what a horse makes them feel. And you won't be the last. But it only becomes dangerous when you start confusing it for something it's not." Genevieve blinked back the sting behind her eyes. "I wasn't trying to." "I know," Delaney said. "But pain doesn't ask for permission. It just finds whatever shape will hold it." That night, Genevieve didn't go home right away. She stayed and helped Delaney sweep the barn aisle, refill feed buckets, and close up the tack room. It felt like penance, but also like the beginning of something quieter. Something more grounded. When she finally pulled into her driveway, Lucas's car wasn't there. She walked inside and found the note on the kitchen table. "I'm heading back to the city for a while. I need to clear my head. Maybe we both do. Elle." There was no anger in the handwriting. Just resignation. Maybe even hope. Genevieve sat at the table, staring at the empty seat across from her. The chair he always used. The space between them. Maybe it was time they both stopped pretending that being married meant they were still together. And maybe, just maybe, distance could teach them how to return, if that's what they truly wanted. She didn't cry. She made tea, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat on the back porch, watching the wind sweep through the trees. Something had broken. Yes. But not everything. There was still time to rebuild. Time to forgive. Time to choose better, for herself, and maybe one day, for them. We sincerely thank you for joining us for today's special story. If you enjoyed it, we kindly encourage you to subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share your reflections in the comments below. Your continued support inspires us to bring you more meaningful and engaging stories every single day. And click on the video above to see more inspiring stories, my dear.